Sego Sawagwego, Yotakahron Nikhita, Hi everyone, my name is Yotakahron, Christa Jonathan. I am partway between classes right now, so I was in the class of 2019. I'm on a medical leave right now, and I will be going into the class of 2020 in September. I grew up on Six Nations Reserve, but lived there my entire life. I grew up going to Mohawk Longhouse, and I went to elementary school on the reserve, and then there's no high schools on the reserve, so I had to leave the reserve to go to high school. I went to Brantford, and after that, I went to McMaster. I did an undergrad in sociology and Indigenous studies. I did a year abroad in the UK, and then I did my master's in sociology, and then I got into medical school. So me and a friend were talking about it and decided that we needed to start a group to get the voices of our peers and to see if other people wanted to make sure that Indigenous health was actually included into the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so we started it, I think, around this time last year, and we were able to, in a matter of months, push forward that the incoming class, so the class of 2020, had mandatory e-modules to introduce them to the topic of Indigenous health. And then we created sort of a group within the school with different people in the administration, different preceptors and everything to try and make Indigenous health more of a focus. And we also advocated for a specific Indigenous health chair within the, we have diversity chairs and ROCON chairs, and so we advocated for an Indigenous health focused one. And I believe they just agreed to have that be a part of a one person coming once a day to work towards incorporating not only Indigenous health, but different aspects of Indigenous health within the curriculum. A lot of people tend to put us in a box, and they don't think of Indigenous health as being something that could add to the curriculum as a whole. And a lot of philosophies around Indigenous views around health are that our health is all-encompassing, which is what a lot of medicine is trying to move towards. Mm-hmm. And so many Indigenous people, when we look at health, we don't look at health, we look at well-being. And so we look at a person's physical health, their mental health, their spiritual health, and their emotional health. And for us, that is how you are well as a person. And so the physical part of it, which is traditional or Western medicine, is just one aspect of health. And so if we look at trying to incorporate an Indigenous worldview into medicine, you would broaden that. You would bring in the social determinants of health. You would bring in how a person was raised and how they're feeling and how everything that makes them who they are. And so we're trying to get that the focus, and not just I think when people think of Indigenous health, they're like, oh, traditional medicines, and they don't realize that's just one small aspect of who we are. So we have the local officers that are in each medical school, and then we have a national officer of Indigenous health. And so each of these positions are a way that people can be connected within the broader Indigenous community. And we also connect as local officers if say somebody's looking for a resource at one school and they're trying to help a student connect, or they can use that network of local officers of Indigenous health throughout the country, and it's a way that we can connect people on a broader scale. The best way for our curriculum to change is to integrate alternative forms of knowledge and people who have expertise in these communities. I know that there's a perception in medicine that we have to learn from other doctors, and I think the way that we can always improve curriculum is to learn from experts in their fields, and that also includes people within community. Mm-hmm. And so not just looking at people who have degrees, but people who, if we're talking about homelessness, maybe get somebody who's comfortable sharing their own experience in homelessness, mm-hmm. and not just have somebody who has studied the issue. And I think that that's the way to learn. It's not the only way to learn, but I think it's the best way to learn, because you relate to people on a more personal level, mm-hmm. rather than just studying them. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I can see curriculum improving. I know that there's a good group of people who are constantly working towards it in different medical schools. I think a lot of the change needs to come from the top, though, because we can advocate for all these issues, but it's a systemic issue. And if you look at the work of Dr. Janet Smiley and Billy Allen, they published a paper about racism being a systemic issue within healthcare for Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. And so for me, in order for us to to try and reduce that. It needs to come systemically. The change needs to happen across the board, and not just at small schools. Like small changes, it needs to happen across the board. What I've been able to study from the environment in medicine is that a lot of people are scared of repercussions. I feel like a lot of the work that I've done this year would not have been done if I had been stuck in that fear. And for me, it was a lot of, you just need to set up a meeting. Like these deans, these chairs, they're really open to sitting with students. And if you find a like-minded group of people, then you can show them that it's not just one student that's concerned about these things, but it's multiple students. And so we had a campaign where, in order to have a meeting with the chairs, we got a bunch of people who also were concerned about the fact that we didn't have any Indigenous health in our curriculum to email the chairs. And so we just shared the emails, and we said, if you're concerned about this too, please just send an email. We're all doing it, and if you want to do it too, you can. And so within a matter of a week, they got 50 emails. And so it becomes more of a thing if I think people feel more comfortable if they know a lot more people are doing it. And so the best thing is word of mouth, hey, this issue really is important to me. Can you take 2 minutes out of your day to also send an email to say that it's important for you too? And it just snowballs from there. Yeah. For me, teaching that I hold within my life is to always be very honest, and honesty, you're just vulnerable all the time. When I started in medicine, I wasn't used to the fact that there wasn't a huge Indigenous community. In my master's and my undergrad, I at least had a couple of other peers who had similar lived experiences. And I think in medicine, there's a couple more Indigenous people that don't have similar experiences. They identify on paper, but they don't identify to everyone else. And for me, that was a struggle because it was the first time that I've been in such an environment where I was the only Indigenous voice. And I couldn't just say that I wasn't Indigenous because I look Indigenous, and it's just a part of who I am. So if somebody asks about my upbringing, I'll say, yeah, when I grew up on the res, this is what happened. And so I think for me, it's such a fundamental part of who I am that I carry that with me every day and in all my interactions. And it has taken a toll on myself. And it's ridiculous. The best learning experience I had of self-care was actually removing myself from medical school for a year. And it was tough. I actually had an experience, multiple experiences that led me up to this decision. But in particular, I was a part of a panel. We were educating my class of 2019 about Indigenous health, and we had a student ask a very ignorant question. And it triggered me. It triggered the residential school survivor. And I stood up and I said, there's no space for those questions, because as students, we're expected to prepare for pro-com the same way we're expected to prepare for tutorial, but people don't, because they don't take it seriously, which I think is a huge concern, that they don't take social issues seriously in medicine. But for me, I got a lot of backlash from the administration, from preceptors, and from my peers for saying that class, that there was no room for those types of questions. And it was a learning experience for me because it showed me that class is a safe space for white males to ask questions, but not for Indigenous people to say that is off topic. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to do the preparation and the education of yourself, and that we will not discuss that here. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, I had that event happen, which traumatized me. And then over the course of a couple of days, I had a lot of cyberbullying on top of that. And so for me, it was a very serious, I need to step away. I need to take care of myself. And prior to that, I had a bunch of different issues that were also of racism in health. And I didn't take the time to step back and say, am I okay? And so it'll be different approaching medicine now, because I'm operating from a different framework of making sure that I'm okay first. And so when you're the only Indigenous student and you're expected to not educate your peers, your preceptors, the patients you interact with, you're expected to always be on and have that knowledge while also being a medical student and having to do everything else that everyone else has to do. And another layer for me is I'm non-science background. I'm from sociology. So it was just my story, and what happened with me, I think, is preparing me to step forward in making sure that I'm always okay first. Mm-hmm. And being okay with saying, it's not my job to educate you. You have to go and educate yourself. I'm sorry, I'm done doing that work. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an uncomfortable position for some folks to be in, to say, you need to educate yourself. I'm not doing that for you. because I think a lot of people expect people of color, Indigenous people, to always have to educate them. And I think the best form of self-care is to make sure that you're not burdening yourself. And so for me, I'm not going to go back into medicine worrying about, I need to make sure I have all this knowledge and like remember the treaties so I can educate people about treaties and traditional medicines and what's it like growing up on the reserve and what's it like going through when like you have to deal with a bunch of death and illness. And so for me, it'll be interesting going back to medicine with the framework of making sure I'm okay first, because medicine also doesn't accommodate that. And so I think what I recommend a lot of students to do is to look into the school policies around taking time off for yourself. Because I know at McMaster, we're allowed to take 10% of our MFs. So that works out to be about 3 days per MF. And I think a lot of people don't just say, you know what, I'm just going to take this day off. And like, yeah, the work will be there when you go, but to just take a day, even if you don't want to take a school day, take a weekday or weekend, just where you don't put yourself in that stressful environment. You take the day and you try, like, you don't feel guilty about it. You take the day, you take even a morning and you just say, this morning, I'm just going to watch TV and not feel guilty. I'm going to go on a hike and not feel guilty that I'm not studying again. But I never thought of what my presence as a visible Indigenous person would do for a patient until I had an interaction. And I had a patient interaction, and a patient was immediately written off as being like a patient who was like confrontational and may not give a truthful history. And I just walked into that patient encounter and just saying, like, I never experienced that. I don't know that about you. I just need to know about you. And the patient actually opened up to me and said, like, I've never been treated this way. Mm. And for me, I think the main message I have when I always tell people about advocating for patient safety and patient health, especially when it comes to Indigenous patients, is to treat them like you would treat somebody like your best friend or your brother or your sister or somebody in your family, because you would treat them with kindness. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't automatically assume they're lying. You would say, can you tell me about that? Just because they're coming in and they look Indigenous doesn't mean that they're asking for Indigenous medicine, doesn't mean that they're drug seeking or whatever, right? They're a patient, and you don't, like, you just treat them like you would any other patient, but also make sure that you know how to treat patients. And we don't talk a lot about compassion, and where compassion comes from is love. Mm. And so for me, I live my life trying to be surrounded by love, by the people who love me and who I love, and I try to give that to others as well, even though I don't know you, and even though in society it's so weird to say, like, I'm giving love to a stranger, but in that moment, especially when patients come in, they're so vulnerable, and they're maybe in the worst situation of their life, and if you could offer somebody love during that situation and just make sure that they feel cared for and they feel heard, I think is why I want to be into medicine, and I think it goes hand in hand with my patient advocacy work with Indigenous patients specifically, is making sure that they feel loved and cared for and safe in environments where that might not always come out. I think so. I think one thing that is unfortunate about being a Indigenous person in medicine, especially if you're a visibly Indigenous person in medicine, you're kind of expected to do the work. And so I went through a phase where I was thrown into the work, and it took a toll on me because I didn't know how to balance it, because it was a new aspect in my life. And then I learned how to balance it, but then balancing it was also removing myself from medicine. And so I think I've reached a point where I've thought about it a lot, and I also went through a phase where I'm like, I'm not doing that work. That work's not what I need to do. Like, settlers need to educate themselves. It's not my responsibility. And then I reached a point where I'm also like, but they also need help. They also need help doing that. And so for me, I've kind of reached a peace with it where it will always be a part of my career. It'll always be a part of my life. And I just need to work out how I want that to be a part of my life. I need to look at how much of medicine is going to take up of my life, but also how much advocacy work is going to take up of my life, because I also want a life outside of medicine. I want a family outside of medicine. I actually am involved in, it's called Healthy Roots, and so we're trying to eat specifically foods that are pre-contact foods, but foods that are Indigenous to the area, and it's all about eating healthier, and we eat like wild game and fish and a lot of fruits and vegetables. And so for me, that takes up a lot of my time as well as medicine. I also, I go home a lot. I have a lot of family things that are going on. So when I live in St. Catharines, it's about an hour and 15 minutes away. And so I drive home on the weekends and spend time with family. I do a lot of my ceremonies still. And I also do a lot of our traditional crafts. So I do a lot of beadwork and just things like that, just things that I like to do that can kind of take me out of medicine for a while, just to kind of regroup and then get back to it. Mm-hmm. So since I was 4, I've worked towards this goal of becoming a doctor. And so for me, I think a lot of the motivation comes from my own personal drive to accomplish my goals. And I think when I get down a lot, I always call home, and I call my mom, my grandma, or my friends, and if I need somebody just to debrief with for a while, it really helps to be connected. In the last year, I've had multiple deaths in the family, or a lot of emergencies in the family where it has taken me away from medicine. And I think a lot of my peers might not have to go through the extent of what I have to go through. It's the joy and the love that comes from having a huge community and a huge family, but it also comes with a lot of the other side, right? So I think a lot of people, when we talk about surrounding yourself with love, you also have to be prepared for when somebody passes, because every relationship that you enter into will come with loss. And so I think for me, a lot of it is trying to remain in that love for that person when I'm going through those losses. And so, I think about a year ago, last January, we were in class and I got news about a friend who had committed suicide or completed suicide. And so it's something like that that has to pull me out of my studies. And then I'm able to go home and be with my family and my community. And then I have to come back, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think I have to develop ways in which I can sit with what has happened. And I do a lot of techniques of self, breathing and talking to myself, and trying to get through these difficult times that I think a lot of people might push aside or brush off. And for me, a lot of the teachings I have is you can't just brush off your emotions, and you can't just hold them down. And so if you feel like crying, you need to cry. If you feel like you're angry, you need to let that out. And a lot of people think if you're angry, then you need to be violent. And it's no, sometimes you just need to scream. Some things like that, where I've become more in tune with my body. And it sounds really weird and wishy-washy for some people, but if you just listen to your body, you're able to say I'm feeling really tense right now, and how can I make sure that I let that out or let that go. And so for me, I think that helps with overcoming a lot of the stresses. But I've had a lot of barriers that are systemic. And so when I got into medical school, the bank actually denied me a line of credit because the person at RBC said, you're Indigenous, so you get school paid for, so you don't need this money. And the ironic thing is, we do get scholarships from our band, but I had already gotten one for 1 degree. They weren't going to fund my 3rd degree. And so it was I was told no at both, both avenues. And so I was trying to figure out a way that I could stay in medicine or afford to stay in medicine because I don't have the money. And so I think a lot of it is not sitting with, wow, that sucks. That sucks that not sticking in that and being so what can I do now? And so I think I'm a really good advocate for other people because I'm a good advocate for myself and saying okay, you're not going to fund me. You're not going to give me a line of credit. So I need to go somewhere else. And I need to keep going to other places to try and find it. So most people Frosh Week, they were spent getting to know their peers and getting doing all these activities. And mine was spent going to different banks and trying to say, will you give me a line of credit? A lot of people talk about it literally being 2 paths and you walking between the two, walking in 2 worlds, because the Indigenous world is different than the Western world. And so for me, I sit a lot in the Indigenous world, but I also borrow a lot from the Western world and my education, and I have a cell phone, I have a car, all these different modern amenities, but I also spend time on the land and go on walks in the bush and try to stay connected that way. A lot of Indigenous people are storytellers. And so if you ask me how I got a cut on my arm, I'm going to tell you a story about it. I'm not going to say like in one sentence what happened. And so I think when you're interacting with Indigenous patients, I think a lot of people want like substantial like tips of if you want to be a safe person for an Indigenous patient. And so interaction with Indigenous patients might take longer, but they might not. So some patients, I think having patience with your patients is something that I would recommend. Is some people, they might need to tell you that story, and it might be therapeutic. So even not Indigenous patients might also need to tell you their story, and that might help them. Not physically, but it might help them spiritually, mentally. It might help them just to share their story. And medicine often isn't conducive to that, especially if you have like 15 minutes with a patient. And so there are ways in which you can learn like interviewing skills where you can direct them, but not cut off their story. And so I think that's one thing that I want to share with people is a way to be safe with patients is to make sure that they feel safe talking to you.